Hi, it's Pastor Anthony again. This is part 2 of a 3-video series on abuse. In part 1, we talked about what to do if you or someone you know or care about is being abused. In that video, we said, don't wait, get safe. So I want to just say one more time, if you're being abused or someone you know is being abused, don't wait, get safe. Go to the police, call 911, go to an abuse shelter, go to the hotline.org or call their number. All of that information will be in the description as well as in the description of part 1. But this is part 2, and in part 2 we're going to talk about what does abuse really look like, and how do I know whether I'm being abused or not? What if something doesn't quite feel right, but I don't know if it's really abuse or not? Well, hopefully after this video you will be able to know a little bit better. In part 3, we're going to talk more specifically about physical and sexual abuse. So I encourage you, if you are concerned about those things, please watch that video. But if you know that you're experiencing those things, I just want to say again, don't wait, get safe. But in part 2, right now, we're going to talk about some different forms that abuse can take. We're going to talk about verbal abuse, we're going to talk about emotional abuse, psychological abuse, social abuse, and financial abuse. And what I want to say before we go on is that, in fact, what's most important to know about abuse is that it's all about control. It's not so much about what the abuser is using to achieve control over somebody's life, but actually the fact that there is somebody who's trying to maintain excessive power and control over another person. So if you are concerned that you are being abused, just remember, at any time you get through this video and you're like, man, I think I am being abused, don't wait, get safe right away. But maybe you're still not quite sure, and to be honest, this is a video, so I'm not going to be able to know your situation, not going to be able to talk to you about it. So I really encourage you, talk to a certified counselor or psychologist, somebody who's been approved and has good reputation in the community, somebody who's close by to you, somebody that you can see. Not just so that you can know whether you're being abused or not, but so that you can also get healing if you have been abused. So a great resource to help you find a licensed counselor or psychologist in your area is at focusonthefamily.com. They have a section that helps you find exactly somebody in your area, and that specific link will be in the description. But you can also call a phone number during the day, during business hours. Call 855-771-4357, and in fact, they will both give you some preliminary counseling if you need it over the phone, and then help you connect to somebody in your area. So, right now, let's talk about abuse. Let's talk about verbal abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, social abuse, and financial abuse. With abuse, remember, it's all about control and holding power. So in verbal abuse, it's really about somebody using words to maintain control and power over another person. This can be by demeaning the other person, calling them names, cussing them out, yelling. Sometimes we think of verbal abuse as when somebody gets angry and yells, but you can be verbally abusive by threatening and being demeaning without ever raising your voice, and by being verbally aggressive without ever yelling. These things are not required. The tone can be used, and on top of that, there can just be slander and all kinds of just berating a person. All of these things can be verbal abuse. But what about emotional abuse? Well, emotional abuse really involves somebody trying to control another person by manipulating their emotions. So what does that look like? Well, a lot of times it may be things like saying, you know, the kids don't really love you, they'll stay with me, or, you know, you're a stupid, horrible person, and really just tearing somebody down. Yeah, so there's a lot of overlap with verbal abuse, but it can also be achieved by other kinds of emotion by keeping somebody scared, or maybe even manipulating when they're happy to keep themselves in control. But especially, it's very clear when it's somebody who's being just emotionally damaging to another person. When we talk about psychological abuse is actually when somebody uses psychological tools or manipulation, or tries to manipulate the psychological states of another person so that they can have control and power over them. So this can be done, in a very negative way, with the same sort of yelling and manipulating aggression. It can include like trying to keep control over somebody's passport, over their identity, their ID card, those kinds of things. These can be forms of psychological abuse. In addition to that, it can be very manipulative kinds of abuse, where the person says, oh, so-and-so really is never going to believe what you have to say. They only really believe me. The kids will leave you alone and they'll stay with me, or those kinds of things, or making the abused person believe that it's their fault that they're being abused. It's not your fault if you're being abused. The other person has a responsibility to maintain self-control. So if you're being abused, it's not your fault, it's the other person's fault. But psychological abusers very often try to manipulate what people think and the way they process through information so that they can stay in control. However, even more sinister, sometimes they will use positive reinforcement. Not just negative things, but saying, I'll love you more if you would just do this, or I would think you're so smart if you would just think like I think, or if you would just do what I told you to do. All of these things often can be kinds of psychological manipulation, where we want to be loved, we want to be thought of as smart, and so we do what they say, just so that we can feel better about ourselves and have that kind of relationship. And these are forms of psychological abuse. Social abuse is often very related. And when it comes to social abuse, what can happen is that the abuser maintains excessive control over the person's social life and uses their social life against them, or restricts their social life so much that they have no social life, and uses their lack of social life against them. So if they're using isolation against the person they're abusing, maybe they're controlling who your friends are, or maybe they're controlling who you're allowed to spend time with, or maybe they don't let the person they're abusing out in public except for when they're with them in person right there. Or maybe maybe you're listening to this and somehow you've got a hold of a computer and you're seeing this and you're locked in your house and you're never allowed to leave. These are kinds of abuse, and you need to stop waiting and you need to get safe right now if that's you. It's very dangerous. Please don't wait. Get safe right away if you're being locked in the house. On the other hand, they could be using your desire for a good social reputation. It's a kind of psychological abuse as well, where they're saying, well, I'm going to start telling people what you did that you don't want anybody to find out about, but they're all going to know, and you're never going to have a good social reputation again. Or maybe they're going to do something like they'll say, I'm going to start lying and I'm going to start telling people all these bad things about you, and they're going to believe me because they'll never believe you. They're only going to believe me. And this can be a form of social abuse. Again, when we're thinking about financial abuse is when the abuser really tries to maintain control by controlling the person's access to finances. So this is not like, a married couple that needs to stick to a budget, and one partner is really encouraging the other partner to stick to a budget for the sake of, stable family situations and not getting evicted, those kinds of things. This is when somebody uses a budget to club the other person over the head and keep them in control over another person. So in this case, it would be the kind of person who doesn't let their partner have access to money, or if they do have access to money or credit cards, they're only able to have access to a little bit, or maybe their access, they have to be extremely accountable So they have to bring back all these receipts at the end of the day and give all these lengthy explanations for why they spent every single penny. These can be kinds of financial abuse. Financial abuse can also take the form of neglect, of threatening not to feed you or to clothe you or those kinds of things. Financial abuse can be any of these kinds of things. And remember, it's about somebody trying to control you by your access to finances. Or maybe they'll try it more psychologically and they'll say, you'll never be able to get a job all on your own. You really need me to provide for you. You'll never be able to exist on your own. You desperately need me to provide for you. And these can be kinds of psychological financial abuse. So if any of these kinds of abuse, you've listened to it and you're like, man, I really think this person is controlling and manipulating me, I encourage you, please talk to a counselor. Again, all the information about Focus on the Family's number and website is going to be in the description. And if you really feel that you're in danger after listening to this, don't wait. Get safe. Call 911. Break out of the house if you have to. Do what you have to do. But don't wait. Get safe. And in part 3, if you've listened to this and you're like, yeah, I don't know if that's the kind of abuse, I feel like my abuse that I'm facing is more physical or sexual, well, then I really encourage you to watch part 3 of this 3-video series where we're going to talk about physical abuse and sexual abuse and the different forms that they can take. But if you are facing that, remember, don't wait. Get safe right now. Call 911. Do whatever you have to do to get safe right now. I hope this has encouraged you in the sense of knowing what to do, and I hope you have a greater sense of how to respond to abuse.